focusing on Get On Up with Reverend Shane Harris. Amen. So we thank you all for tuning in. And right now, just want you to call someone and tell them to tune on in to Get On Up with Reverend Shane Harris. All right, we thank you for tuning in today, and we have a good show for you today. We're going to be talking about several things, dealing with the criminal justice system and reforming, or as we would say, transforming the system. We're going to be talking about Meek Mills and talking about Centoya Brown, and we're going to get into some of the politics a little bit later on when we get to the round table, and want to talk about what's going on with Russell Simmons, and want to talk about what's going on with John Conyers and Coyce Roy Moore, and all the sex abuse and different things that are happening throughout the nation. So we thank you for tuning in today. But I want to begin just talking about this young man. He's about 30 years old now. That's Meek Mills, who's a very successful rapper, and he's currently serving 2 to 4 years jail sentence for allegedly violating probation. And at this probation, he was on probation about in 2008. You know, when he was a teenager, he was arrested and charged and convicted of gun charges and drug charges. He did about 8 months in jail, to my understanding. And after he did the 8 months, he got out and they put him on 5 years of probation. You know, it used to be a time where they will put you on a year probation or maybe 2 years, but now it's generally, typically in California, 3 years probation or parole. But now it looked like in some of the other states they're putting you on a 5-year probation. Then, to my understanding, that was even extended. And so this young man, he didn't commit any new crimes, even though there was a few incidents that happened, but he was never charged thus far with any of those crimes. One was with a dirt bike, and the other one was another incident that took place at an airport, I guess. And but what ended up happening is that his probation officer and prosecutor, they recommended that he do not serve any time in jail or prison for whatever they said he violated. But the judge, and people had issues with the judge. I believe her name is Judge Janice Brinkley. She locked him up anyway, and she had some personal issues with him, and many feel that she's taking this personal rather than being neutral. The judge is supposed to be the most neutral person in the courtroom, but we find that in most instances that the judge is not. So one of the things that we want to do, and we want to get right into our calls, and callers, do please call back in right now if I missed your call, and so I have Armand King on. Are you there?
To press 1 to send a voice. Press.
All right, let me get him on here. Do I have you, Mr. King?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you for calling in. Get On Up live with Reverend Shane Harris. Of course, this is not Reverend Shane Harris. I'm guest hosting for him today. But thank you for calling in. And we were just talking about Meek Mills and dealing with the criminal justice system. With this young man was put on probation back in 2008. He did 8 months in jail for gun and drug charges. And he's just a typical example, the tip of the iceberg of what's happening throughout the nation as far as especially men of color, men and women of color, black and brown, and how they are caught up in the criminal justice system. You know, there are many, and I know you work with many young men, and myself work with many young men who sometimes when they're in jail for a charge that they didn't do or something that they're fighting, and they're in jail for 6 months, 8 months, a year, and they've been told, hey, man, you can be fighting this case for 2 to 5 years, and then the prosecutor come with and say, hey, we'll let you go right now. You just got to plead to a felony and a strike, and we'll put you on probation. And many times they take the deal, but then what ended up happening is that it's an endless cycle of in and out of prison, in and out of jail, and most of the time, not every time, but in most instances, just for a probation violation. And what are your thoughts on some of this when we talk about this, with what Meek Mill's going through, and especially, because he's just the tip of the iceberg of what's happening throughout the nation?
Well, man, first of all, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation.
Yes.
And it is definitely a topic that hits close to home. Just today alone, I've been contacted twice by 2 different individuals that have have, in my opinion, almost been tricked into signing deals of these probation.
Yeah.
And what I see probation as, it's a tool that's misused and is used as like a it's a net. Like it's almost just they set you up to mess up while you're on probation.
That's right.
To when you get released on probation, you get that list of jobs, a job that especially living in San Diego, that barely gonna cover your rent, barely gonna cover your living expenses. Don't have a kid or two, then you're in a position where you just have barely just enough. So you're thinking about what the next scheme is going to be, what you're going to do, and they end up right back in jail. A lot of the stipulations they put on people with the classes that you may have to take that go along with the probation. You end up missing work, missing out, being able to go on opportunities and things by some really unnecessary classes.
Right.
So it's like it's not set up. The whole system is not set up for someone to actually succeed and to move on into productive society like they claim it is for. And it's a setup. It's a trap, man. And it really don't. If the goal ultimately was for a person to succeed and get off probation, get off paperwork, they're not giving you the tools when you get out to do this. I'm working on some kind of a book, some kind of method that will teach something. They can actually have a handout, some kind of guide for somebody when they get out of jail, because they don't have that. They don't have the owners left. Especially if you've done years and years in jail, society's changing so fast, you can't even keep up. You get out here and you're lost, man, with no kind of proper guidance.
It's
a trap. It's a vicious trap.
Absolutely, man. I had one of my homeboys. He got out of prison. I think he did about almost 15 years, and that's what he told me. He did federal time like you did, and he said that when he got out, it was like the Twilight Zone out here. Everything was moving fast, and he was trying to catch up and so on. Back in my days, I got in church in '84, so I go back to the '70s and '80s, being caught up in it with guys that are being locked up. And they've been forced to plead to deals that will put them on probation. I remember back in my days, you would get out on OR almost on anything, maybe not attempted murder, things like that. But from I've been arrested for carjacking, auto theft, fighting in public, robberies, and I most of the time I got out on ORs. After went to the third day or 72 hours, went to court, pleaded not guilty, and then they would let you go on get out on an OR. But now, almost any small thing, even a misdemeanor, you got to bail yourself out. Misdemeanors, when we went to jail for misdemeanors, we would get released the same day, or the next day, without having to bail yourself out. And a lot of times, especially when you're over policing communities of color and you have a lot of poverty, people don't have that kind of money to be trying to bail themselves out of jail. So a lot of time what ends up happening, this is what I'm seeing, and even when you try to tell these young men, do not make a deal, they're making deals like within 72 hours. I've seen it and experienced it with my own eyes as far as being in the courtroom with young men, because they make these deals that they think they're getting a real good deal on, saying, hey, we'll let you get out now. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And so they may be struggling going through some things in jail because it's not safe for people in there. And so they make these deals and put them on probation. So what do you think needs to be done in order to start reforming this system, so people like Meeks and others that are going through what they're going through with the violation of probation? I don't think it should be 5 and even 3 years, but let alone people making deals when they haven't even had a trial yet. They're making the deals because they feel as though I can be in jail and can't get bailed out, or I don't have the money to bail out. I can be in jail for 2 to 5 years. And I can get out right now on a felony. How do we reform that and change that?
I think the word is not reform. I don't think it needs to be reformed. I think it needs to be totally renewed.
Yeah, transform.
I think the whole thing is it transformed completely.
Yeah.
I think a whole new way of thinking, a whole new system for rehabilitation is implemented, because it has the systems that have gone have not worked.
Right.
It has not worked. The prison industrial complex continues to grow. Recidivism has not stopped nor slowed down.
Right.
So the ways of the past and the ways of dealing with these situations obviously have not worked. I mean, I'm not a genius. I'm not. I have a college degree, PhD, master's, none of that. But just from my plain vision I can tell and see that this has not worked. People are still violating, doing the same things. You know, a lot of it stemming from poverty. A lot of it just stemming from not having the proper direction and people to help and guide to help people get off of probation. You know, so I don't think it needs to be reformed, man. We need to, you know, get down to the drawing board and set up another system. And like you see in other countries, that they have great systems to help people get reacclimated into society that may have made a mistake or something that brought them into being incarcerated. So the models are out there. Now, do we have the people in leadership that are willing to follow those examples instead of continuing down the same path that has not worked? You know, they said a definition of an insanity is you know, repeating the same thing, expecting a different result. So, man, yeah, it's time to look at these other models that are working across this country, across this world. Excuse me. Look beyond our country, which is the #1 prison country in the world. You know, and maybe take on some of these other models and try them out. At least try them out. We can't be stonewalled to trying them out because our stuff's not working. It hasn't.
That's right.
Yeah, so that would be my opinion. I don't even want to relook at the way they're doing it now. I think it needs to be totally gone. And even just on a local level here in San Diego, you know, I just recently sat down with the chief of probation, Adolfo Gonzalez, as well as the assistant chief, Little John. And both of these dudes have great ideas. They have a great methods of creating this probation system to be a lot different and the way it should be, you know what I mean, to really help people. But you know, like I expressed to them, the problem is not necessarily even them. It's these are the heads of the department, but it's the lower level people that are actually dealing with the people that violate them, and unfortunately they can't control every case. So the whole mentality of the probation department, of the people working under the probation department, needs to change. It needs to totally change. And if we got to do a massive rehire, we got to do a massive rehire. But the way it's been going has not worked.
Right. And I know that. And I know also that even when the judge puts someone on probation, he has this court order that probation is supposed to, you know, make sure that the individual is in compliance. But a lot of times what happened with probation, they add a lot of other stipulations too. You know, and especially young men who are documented as gang members and they put on gang probation, that's one of the worst ones that you find that a lot of stuff that these young men have to go through to where that they're almost being set up to violate their probation, and then they're in prison 2 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, or whatever they may have made a deal or pleaded to just to get out of jail because they couldn't afford to bail themselves out. So the system altogether is a setup. Now, before we let you go, Mr. King, thank you. Tell us a little bit about your organization and about what you got coming up real soon.
Okay, well, you know, I'm the program director with a local nonprofit organization, Paving Great Futures. And just in the title itself, we're trying to pave great futures for those people that may have been formerly incarcerated on the pathway to incarceration, both male and female, that, you know, just I would say victims to poverty, victims to their situation, the circumstances around them. We teach entrepreneur skills, job training, how to run and operate your own businesses, and really give them a self-confidence and teach them that these things that have been looked down upon in society that they may have picked up in the streets, they're transitional skills. And once you realize who you really are and that these things you've learned and that you may have used to do illegal things in the streets, if you transfer them into the positive legal life, you know, you can actually be a prosperous person. You're actually sharp. But, so we teach these things, we train these things, and we deal with a lot of people that were formerly incarcerated, trying to help them to stay out of jail, you know, and not fall back into that trap that's been set up for them. And with this next week, Thursday, a little less than a week from today, December 7th, we are having our annual gala at Bayview Baptist Church in the Martin Luther King Center, where we'll be displaying and, you know, more than just numbers and showing statistics, but we want to, you know, celebrate the work that we've done in this past year, because we have, you know, thank God, have accomplished some good stuff, and we want to present it to the people, and as well as inform you guys, the world on what we're doing and coming up in this next year and what our plans are.
Right.
And hopefully together we, with the support, because it's going to take more than just us. With the problems of our city and the world are big. So it's going to take, like my brother, your son say, teamwork makes the dream work. And we're trying to make the dream work.
That's right.
So it's a fundraiser dollar. The tickets are $50, which is going to help Paving Great Futures keep the doors open, because, you do need money to do and extend and keep expanding like we are. So, anybody who wants to come, it's open to all. You can find us on Eventbrite, or if you go on to Facebook, Paving Great Futures. We're pretty much advertising, spamming people all over the place. So please get your ticket and come on in, man. And yeah, so that's just a little briefness. But if you want to learn more about Paving Great Futures and what we're doing, please come December 7th. Okay, December 7th. And I know I'm gonna see you there, right, Bishop Bowser?
Yeah. Well, I told you I had church, so I'm just giving a donation.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I forgot. But, you with us every day. You already know what's going on.
That's right. But you do have my financial support and moral support. I'm there for you. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
and
man.
More than that, man, I appreciate you.
Thank you for calling in, man. And we'll be talking. All right?
Absolutely. All right, Bishop. Have a great day.
You too. God bless.
Bye.
All right. We thank Mr. Armand King for calling in. And anyone else that want to call in, you got about 12 more minutes to call in. And the call-in number is 619-431-3186. And this is Get On Up with Reverend Shane Harris. And I'm guest hosting for Reverend Shane Harris. And this is Bishop Cornelius Bowser that you're listening to. And we thank you for tuning in. And one of the things that we also want to talk about, not just Meek Mills, but also a young lady by the name of Centoya Brown. And Centoya Brown, she was about 16 years old when she was, she ran away from home, I believe, and picked up by a pimp. He abused her. He raped her. He forced her into sex trafficking. She was a victim, 16 years old, a young girl, And this young lady was sold to men, grown men, underage woman sold to grown men. And there was a 43-year-old man that by the name of Johnny, I believe his name was Johnny Michael Allen, who solicited her, and she feared for her life. She feared this guy was a sharpshooter in the military, and she, from her testimony, she believed that he was threatening her with a gun, and so she shot and killed him. And they gave her life in prison. And she was 16 years old when she when she got locked up in 2004, and she'll be 69 years old when she's eligible for parole. Now, one of the things that we do know and understand is that the Supreme Court ruled in 2012 saying that mandatory life sentences without parole should not apply to people convicted of murder as juveniles. But we see how that is happening today with a lot of what's going on in our society today. So I want to move on here and talk about Centoya Brown. And who do I have? Do I have anyone on the line here?
Tasha Williamson.
Hey, Tasha Williamson. Welcome to Get On Up with Reverend Shane Harris. And we were just talking about Centoya Brown, who's serving a life sentence, and there's many celebrities and folks that are trying to work on getting her released from prison because she was underage. She was 16 years old. You have a daughter. I have a daughter. And we can imagine what if that happened to our daughter, what we would be going through and so on. And I know I've had a niece and my sister who was sex trafficked. So I understand it from that perspective, at least, having a family member that was caught up in that lifestyle. And so what is dealing with, this, what's going on with Centoya Brown and sex abuse and what's going on in our nation? What is your opinion about all this?
My view from Miss Brown is that she was not deemed a victim. She was not looked at as many women,
right?
Throughout the justice system, are not looked at as being victimized, and the vicious cycle of when you are brutalized in sex trafficking and you begin to compromise your way of life and your way of thinking, to then become a perpetrator.
Right.
And so for me, I see anyone who's a child who has been victimized for years as a child, that we go back and we look at the fact that the brain of children and even teenagers does not develop at the rate of adults.
Right.
And so when we damage them very early on,
Marshall White,
the effects are horrific. And these are the millions of children that go through the justice system.
Right.
I feel like Ms. Brown was not treated as a victim who had been victimized and decided to defend herself from an adult male who knew she was a child.
Right.
And so I want to also include that there were some studies that were done years back, and that the United States of America must take accountability for the fact that there are over 27 states that allow damaging effects to happen to our young girls, and that we have child marriage happening in the United States. And we allow...
At what age for child marriage, you would say?
Sorry?
What, when you say child marriage, what ages are we talking about? Under 18?
So we have children as young as 12 in some states that have been recorded as being married to people who are 5 and 7 and 8 and even 9 years and more older than them.
Wow.
And so, so the United States must understand that it holds some accountability to the damage that it has allowed children to go through.
Right.
When you look at Roy Moore, who is campaigning for a Senate office, and there's allegations that he slept with a 14-year-old when he was 30-something years old, should tell you the difference from one state to another, that this was acceptable to some white males because in their state it is okay to sleep with children.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have been in dark times, because people in high offices have been abusing children for generations.
Right.
This is not the first time that we have senators sleeping with children, and we have grown men that are paying to sleep with children. This is happening all over the world, including United States. The United States is not dealing with the people that make a lot of money doing it. They are dealing with gang members and calling them sex traffickers, but they're not dealing with the people in Senate houses and nonprofits and businesses and corporations.
All these places supposed to be making the law for us, and they're actually doing the same thing, committing the same kind of crime.
And they breaking the law they breaking the law that is just for us, but unjust to them.
Exactly. And you know, and our listener, as you're speaking, when you talk about Centoya Brown, one of the things, you know, that, you know, really struck me with this is that she was 16 years old, and this was a 43-year-old guy who had solicited an underage young lady for sex trafficking, and that wasn't even seemed like it couldn't have been considered because it gave her a life sentence, and
exactly.
Yeah, and so it just seems crazy to me. This system, as I was talking with Armand earlier, needs to be totally transformed. And what do you think needs to be done?
Definitely. Well, you know, I think that they need to abide by their own laws. And there was a study done from 2002 to 2010 where more than 8,000 people in just 12 states were currently serving sentences of life to 40 or more years for crimes they committed while under the age of 18.
Wow.
Despite a 2012 Supreme Court ruling that mandatory life sentencing without parole for juveniles violates the 8th Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, right?
Exactly.
So now we have Ms. Brown, who has pretty much gotten a life sentence.
Yep.
at 16. And so well, we have to look to judges to say, and district attorneys to say, is this just? Is this fair?
Right.
To a child who was sex trafficked at 16 and was getting ready to be exploited by an adult who at all stands would have been looked at as an upstanding citizen.
Yes. Yeah.
Because he was a real estate broker or something, but he was getting ready to rape and brutalize this child.
Yep, absolutely.
And I've heard no mention, not one mention of him.
Right.
She was 16.
Yes, exactly.
And he was an adult.
Yep, exactly. And so
I've heard, no, where is the justice in that men need to know that she was underage.
Right.
It was unacceptable. It is not moral. There are codes of conduct that we should be upholding as individuals and people, and we're not.
Right. Exactly.
And so we're unjustly, and I believe wholeheartedly, unjustly putting this brown and black women in institutions. The rise of children and women now being incarcerated,
right,
is crazy.
Exactly.
So we no longer go incarcerate. We got this black and brown men of color initiative, and we're damaging now the women and girls.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this damage has been ongoing.
Right.
And so America needs not hold themselves to such a high standard because they are not doing well.
Right.
When it comes to these things, they cannot condemn other countries until they condemn their own selves.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's it's crazy, and hopefully, with enough pressure, Centoya Brown, at least they'll go back and do a resentencing for her to where that she can get a chance at life again. When you're 16 years old, like you said, your mind is not even fully developed yet. And a lot of scientific work has proven that. And so they need to go back and visit some of these things, especially follow the order of the Supreme Court and, go and resentence her and release her. So I believe they're doing trying to do a great endeavor and a great work to have that sentence turned around. And we hope it's done. We hope that it is done. There's a lot of people. She's just like we was talking about with Meek Mills. She's the tip of the iceberg as far as things that need to be done as far as transforming the criminal justice system. So thank you, Tasha Williamson, for calling in and sharing your views with us about this criminal justice reform system and addressing Centoya Brown. And we hope to talk to you very soon.
Definitely. Okay. I just want to leave one comment that the women out there need to understand that we are the most powerful political voters.
That's right.
In the U.S.
That's right.
And that our voice is our vote. Our vote is our voice. And
That's
that
right.
you need to get out and you need to vote because your children and your sisters and your mothers and your grandmothers, they will be damaged if we don't start voting and uniting as women.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha. Okay. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. We thank Tasha Williamson for calling in on our show here today. The Get On Up with Reverend Shane Harris, your guest host here, Bishop Cornelius Bowser. And, so we got a lot of things that are going on around the nation. When we think about when we look at some of the incidents that are happening, whether it's dealing with Russell Simmons or John Conyers, and as Tasha mentioned, Roy Moore also, and not only that, but we got things going on around the world. And I know people have looked at what's happening in Libya with the detainees there, or as we would call immigrants or asylum seekers, people who are actually trying to escape for their lives because of what is happening in their countries. And now they've been taken, they flee to these countries, and they've been taken in and treated, as detainees. And in the process of that, many of them are beaten, they're hung to trees, they're going through electric shock, they are tortured, and even modern day slavery. And so we're looking to discuss and talk about some of these things. And this is our roundtable here. And we normally have our guests Amos Jones, who normally calls in, and so we're looking for him to call in, and we're going to discuss some of these issues with him. But when we look at him and we talk about Russell Simmons, one of the things that I know that when I've heard and looked at this is something that goes back to, I believe, the 90s with him and some of the allegations that came up against him, the accusations. Of course, he admitted that something happened, but he just has a different story about it and so on. But, it plays into what is happening nationally with sexual harassment and I think this goes beyond sexual harassment. Is sexual abuse, and some call it sexual misconduct and different things like that. But what we're really dealing with here and talking about here is, as Tasha Williams was talking about, is men being allowed, and even some women, but most time it's men that are being allowed to have this type of misconduct without and going unchecked with it, And so I guess now that it's becoming more discussed in the public arena about this, and more exposure and attention is being brought to these issues, we have a lot of folks that are coming out and talking about things that have happened to them throughout the years and of course when something happened a long time ago, that it can be debated and discussed on that also, as far as the memory of things and different things like that. But people have that opportunity to come out, and many times and I've heard discussions on both ends of the spectrum when we talk about these kind of things, because when someone accuses you of something that happened 20, 30, and 40 years ago, of course you should have, if you've done something wrong, you should have some memory of it. But if you're being falsely accused of something, it's hard to defend yourself of something that happened so many years ago. If when the person decided to come out 30 years or 20 or 40 years after the incident has happened. And so, with some of these incidents, they happened a long time ago. But one of the things that I'm looking at is, it seems as though there's, especially in politics, there is a different kind of treatment when you look at people of color that goes through what they go through, and in the political arena, depending on the kind of politics that you play. With Roy Moore, especially there in Alabama, a lot of folks that are supporting him are saying that, he, as Christians, we forgive. And one of the things that I've always looked at, that when you talk about as Christians you forgive, is that you have to first repent. You have to first acknowledge, confess. And we ain't having Bible study here, but, the Bible does say that if you confess your sins, God is just and faithful to forgive you of your sins and to cleanse you from all unrighteousness. But, the Bible says that he that covers his sins will not prosper, but he that confesses them and renounces them finds mercy. And so what we find with Roy Moore is that he hasn't confessed to anything. He hasn't acknowledged anything. So how can you forgive someone of something that they don't even acknowledge happened? They're not really even seeking forgiveness. So a lot of what I'm hearing some of these residents of Alabama say is really a moot point when they say, well, God forgives. That's, to me, an excuse to excuse the man and not hold him accountable for his actions and for what he has done, or allegedly done and being accused of. And of course, as I say, if you are innocent, because I wasn't there and we weren't there, but if you are innocent, it's hard to defend yourself. But the Bible says, out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word will be established. And you have more than 2 or 3 witnesses that are coming forward on this. And in the court of public opinion, it most definitely should be looked at and considered, in the sense that, hey, maybe these people got to be, everybody can't be lying, and everyone can't be just waiting for an opportunity to come forward and get on the scene to accuse someone of some type of sexual misconduct that they didn't commit. And so there are many people in the Senate and in the Congress, when you're dealing with legislators, that are saying that Roy Moore should step aside, even people from his own party. But then you have those that are continuing to support him. And one of the things that I see is those that support him, for the most part, if you ask me, many of them, are finding ways to attack people like John Conyers and other folks who are people of color in there. When incident came up with Bill Cosby, everybody was attacking. Everybody assumed that he was guilty in the opinion of public court. But it seems like some people are given a pass by people in power. Even our president, Donald Trump, was accused, and he got elected. He was accused of sexual misconduct and was still elected as president. And so it goes to show you what America feels about sexual misconduct and women that are coming forward, and it tells women that it really doesn't matter. When it comes to politics, and if we want, if I have a certain political view and we want a certain individual in there, we're going to elect them irregardless of whether he committed a crime or violated someone's rights or not. And so when we look at and we talk about this, Russell Simmons, John Conyers, and Roy Moore, hopefully we'll get back to that if we hear from Amos Jones. I'm hoping that he would call in as he normally does. But I also wanted to talk about Libya and the detainees there. Many people there, and I know some people saw the stories and on CNN the write-up about that in regards to the detainees and how they're being treated there. For years we know that many of these folks have been mistreated as far as beaten and hung on trees and facing electric shock, torture, and many other instances where they face abuse. But for the most part, one of the things that we have noticed is that there's not it's just now there seems to be an upcry about some of these things. Who do I have Amos Jones on the line?
This is Cheryl.
Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. How you doing?
Hi, Pastor Ballard. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Good to hear from you. How you been doing?
Good to hear from you, too. I'm blessed. I can't complain.
All right. So what you got on your mind?
Okay. Well, Pastor Reverend Malone asked me to call you to find out the results of your contact and your invitation to Myrtle Cole.
Oh, hey,
event on Monday.
I'm live online. You called on the line that.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm so sorry. Can you call me back?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. That was a personal call that transferred over to my line here, business that we're trying to take care of and so on. But getting back to the show and getting back to dealing with the modern day slavery that is going on over in Libya, and it's appalling to see how Africans are being treated over there. When I first saw this and looking at this, it kind of like said, man, the things that we went through 400 years ago is still happening today. And many times, when you look at these instances, it is happening from people that is supposed to be protecting us from these things. And people that condemn these things are the same ones that are doing it and then try to justify it and so on. And so I'm hoping that, this will be busted wide open. And not only that, but this addresses a larger problem that we're having with human trafficking and tied into what we were discussing earlier with sex trafficking, is that in human trafficking, people are, and this goes on where people are forced, have forced labor all over the place. Even in the United States of America, we have people living here that are forced to work. They've come in here looking for an opportunity to start a new life, but then they come and find that they themselves are trapped into a vicious cycle of abuse, and having to been treated like slaves, having to work as a slave, like we had to do in the cotton fields and so on. Black folks had to be treated. Now, one of the things that I also wanted to address is in regards to what we call the CLRB, and that's talking about the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, and that's here in San Diego. It is the county's law enforcement review board, and I don't know if many of you have heard recently, but there was like 22 death cases that were dismissed without an investigation, and the clerk dismissed this. And my personal opinion in regards to this is that I feel and believe that CLRB has lost its legitimacy and credibility by allowing 22 death cases to be dismissed without an investigation. And we need to continue to call this out. We need to continue to deal with this situation. Now, one of the things that I recognize and I saw in this, I was reading some of the cases, and I went through every case, 22 cases that they dismissed on through the CLRB, that the CLRB dismissed. Now, what they say is that there is a law, state law that was that deals with the officer bills of right, and it's Penal Code 3304. And basically what that says is that if an investigation is not complete within 1 year, then that officer cannot be charged with anything, or far as not so much charged, but cannot be disciplined or dismissed or anything like that. And so CLRB alleges that because these 22 cases went over the year point, that there was nothing that they could do, so they had to dismiss the case. And I feel that is gross negligence by the CLRB to do that, and not even discuss it. And one of the cases goes way back to July of 2011. There was a 70-year-old gentleman by the name of Russell Hartzell who was beaten to death in the George Bailey Detention Facility. That's 6.5 years ago. And according to, I read the article, The Voice of San Diego, they said that Hartzell was mentally ill and he was also gay. And so, the thing that you look at, did they not investigate this case because he was gay? Did they not investigate it because he had mental issues? Maybe the detention officers, and a lot of times this is one of the things that people don't understand about prison and jail. Many times correction officers and the detention officers can set you up and allow things to happen. I've talked to many young men that done time in jails and prisons and things like that, and they in holding cells and waiting to be transferred, waiting to go to court, different things like that. And they know that you got rivalries, and they'll put rivals and enemies together in the same tank and let them fight it out, or kill or hurt and injure each other, knowing that that's going to happen. And this has been going on for decades and has been allowed to happen. And so when a person has mental issues, and we're just talking about Russell Hartzell, not, because there's many other cases, but I thought that when I looked at this, a 70-year-old gentleman, and all this time that they had to investigate this, they let this case fall through the cracks. And so why didn't they investigate? Why didn't they look into this? Maybe and we'll never know if the detention officer set him up. We'll never know if this happened to him because he was gay or because he had some mental issues. So this is a gross negligence, and it speaks to a larger problem that needs to be addressed through changing state Penal Code 3304, the Officers' Bill of Rights. We have seen enough police brutality shielded by the Officers' Bill of Rights. Now, I believe everybody should have rights, and I'm a union guy, and I believe that, workers, they have a right to negotiate. They have a right to have contracts and, and be protected, under certain contracts and even the law and so on. But when you are a public servant, when you are in public safety positions like being a law enforcement officer or probation officer or sheriffs and different things like that, then you come. I think that even though you have certain rights, we have certain rights too. And it should be a process that is fair and that is just to us, just to citizens, to where that we're going to be allowed to see the process as investigated and looked into, to make sure that there's accountability, there's transparency and accountability. And most of the time that does not happen. Even when you talk about searches and or I should say stop and frisk type deals. And we find that happening a lot in our communities where people are stopped and they are frisked, or their cars are pat down and they are searched unjustly. You can't even get laws passed because of the Officer Bill of Rights to really hold them accountable and say, hey, you know what? You can't search this car until you get written consent to do it, and so on. You shouldn't be just pulling a person over because you see that they're black and they might look like they're criminals, or better yet said, you criminalize communities of color, so then you think you have a just reason to stop anyone that is a person of color in certain communities and so on. And then when you stop them, you're searching their cars, you're violating their rights and so on. And we see this happening so much in our community, and we want a stop to it. And so and this is one of the things I want to say about CLERB, if California citizens are to be held accountable, if I commit a crime as an individual, and this is what I always look at, is that, just like we see, in politics, folks being arrested for lying to the FBI and different things like that, what about those who are in office? Because one of the problems that I have is that, even when you talk about lying, they'll lie to you, but then if you lie to them, you're held accountable. What about them when they lie to you? There should be honesty on both sides. But if I'm as a citizen is going to be held accountable for the crimes that I commit, or if I do something wrong, then law enforcement must be held to the same standard. And many times, because of the Officers' Bill of Rights, they are not held to the same standard. And a lot of times they can do stuff without impunity. They can do things without any consequences. And many times they're not held accountable. And you talk about the community coming forward and speaking. We need the police community to come forward and speak and start crying out against injustice. And we most definitely are thankful for those very few officers that do publicly speak out against the police brutality and the various things that are going on within the system. And we know that one of the things that really has been happening when we talk about this Officer Bill of Rights and what happened with the CLERB is that you have police chiefs, you have sheriffs that want reform in the Officer Bill of Rights because when they fire or terminate corrupt officers, the Officer Bill of Rights shield these officers and overthrow the termination. And many times these individuals are brought right back to the force to commit crimes or engage in corruption again, or to brutalize someone again after they have been fired. So many times it's not that folks are not being held accountable on the perspective within their departments of being fired or being disciplined, but it is this Officer Bill of Rights that overthrows that and so on. And as we talked about earlier with sex abuse and things, one of the things that, and I know some people are not going to like this, but one of the things that tends to the only thing that seems to come at police officers and hold them accountable is when they assault white women, sexually assault white women. Then they are charged, they are prosecuted, and they are convicted, and they are thrown in jail. But if they kill a black man, or they kill a brown man or woman, a black woman or man, or a brown woman or man, they are not held to the same standard, and they can, even when they charge many times, they are not convicted. And the reason why is because many of the folks that they've killed or brutalized are people of color, and these communities, our communities, have been criminalized. We've been looked at as dangerous, as vicious, as crooks, as robbers, and as Tasha Williams was talking earlier about sex trafficking. You know, I remember a couple of years ago when a report came out on sex trafficking in San Diego, you know, because this is like one of the top 10 areas where people make big dollar bills in sex trafficking. And the report was centered around gang members. And so the report came out as though there was only gang members that was engaged in sex trafficking. And we changed or reframed that narrative and challenged that narrative because, you know, every race, every group of people engage when you look at the report, engages in sex trafficking, not just gang members. And when you talk about gang members, you're talking about black and brown folks, because those are the ones that mostly, and people of color who are mostly documented as gang members, because you don't have too many, you don't have white gangs that are documented as gang members. And so that's another way to criminalize community. Then they say, oh, these gang members, they're engaged in sex trafficking and they're organized and all. And we know that that's far from the truth. And we know that when it comes to sex trafficking, everyone is engaged. So then what end up happening is you let so many people slip through the cracks that are engaged in this kind of behavior. And that's just one example of how the community is criminalized, and how when you try to take them to court for police brutality, that they end up getting away with it because they paint the individual as a dangerous person, or as a crook, or someone that didn't comply, or that the officer's just doing his job and he feared for his life, and he end up getting off. But in most cases, because of the Officer Bill of Rights that they have, they get away scot clean. So when we talk about CLRB, the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, and those 22 cases that were dismissed, they need to, those folks need to be held accountable for that. And one of the things we need to do is change the law. So you need to start talking to, we need to start talking to our state legislators and tell them we need reform in the Officer Bill of Rights. And trust me, you really need to, we need to really show support to them, to these legislators, because they face a lot of pressure and intimidation from law enforcement agencies. I've had politicians to tell me this, is that when you try to get up there and change, they become almost like bullies, the police officers unions. They are like bullies in legislation lobbying. They need to make a law against that too, you know, in trying to intimidate and threaten and scare in a roundabout way legislators off of bills that they're trying to pass and so on. So these guys have a lot of leeway, and they get away with a lot. And so we got to change the laws, because California deserves better, and we can do better than what we have right now when we talk about this CLRB, this board that dismissed these 22 cases and death cases, people that have died. We ain't talking about just the regular complaints that come in of police misconduct or law enforcement misconduct, but we're talking about people that have died in custody, or they have killed in the process. And these cases have not been investigated by the CLRB, and that is totally wrong. And, you know, one of the things that I was also thinking about this is, where is the outrage from the County Board of Supervisors? They have failed us also when we talk about this, because they have not stepped up. And most of the time when you're dealing with politics, you have your Republicans, you have your Democrats. And I'm not neither, but let me just say, I have clearly seen that on the Republican side, they do not care about communities of color. Some of them try to make it seem like they care and things like that, but they really don't. They really don't. And that's why even when you have people like Jeff Sessions, who's the Attorney General, that said he's not a racist, but at the same time is rolling back a lot of stuff that President Obama had done in the sense of dealing with the criminal justice system, you know, like private prisons. So private prisons, remember they put a ban on it that they were not going to deal with private prisons no more and end the contracts. But when Jeff Sessions came in, he rolled that back. And so private prisons not only deal with like California, they had some of their folks and have some of their people in private prison, but also in immigration. And now that they picked up immigration, a lot of these people, these folks that are being picked up in immigration, they're not being deported back to their countries. They're being placed in these deportation centers, which are these private prisons. And we have one in San Diego down by the border. And so a lot of these people are kept there for years, and the prisons are making money off of them. And so that's really what it's all about. It's about money. And when you talk about the private prisons, when you talk about rolling back the putting a ban on the mandatory sentences, when you talk about mandatory sentences, guess who is affected by the mandatory sentences? Black folks and brown folks, people of color. 40% of prisons are filled with black people. And when you talk about California, since we're in California, California is the largest prison system in the world, not just in the United States, but it is the largest prison system in the world. And a lot of folks are making money off of it, from the calls that you make when folks are trying to call you, from the bail system, from the private prisons, to to even from, you're talking about from the perspective of the jails and the prisons and the correctional officers and so on. These folks, we need to close these prisons down. There's too many of them. As we talked about earlier, transform this criminal justice system. Instead of locking people up and trying to punish people, let's deal with rehabilitation. Let's deal with getting people back on their feet, getting people to rebuild their lives. And then when people get out, they're on probation for 3 years and get violated and in and out of the system without even never committing a new crime. That needs to be transformed. And then not only do we need to transform that, but we need to make a way when these guys who have felonies, when they get out, they're able to rebuild their lives by getting a good job, a decent job, and don't have all these restrictions where they can't get certain licenses, they can't get certain jobs, and so on. So the system is rigged. Number one, they criminalize the communities of color. Then once you're criminalized, once you got a record, they make sure that you can't prosper, and you have to get a low-end job somewhere and be trapped for the rest of your life, and you can't share in the American dream. So we thank you all for listening in on Get On Up with Reverend Shane Harris, and I'm guest hosting for Reverend Shane Harris today on Get On Up, and we thank those who have called in. We thank you for those of you that are listening, and please tune in every Friday at 9 a.m. That's Pacific time, and 12 p.m., 9 a.m. Pacific time, and 12 p.m. Eastern time on Get On Up with Reverend Shane Harris. God bless you.
You are listening to the San Diego station of inspiration, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, KTAV Radio. For more information on how you can advertise your business, event, or services, please visit us online at KTAV.TV or call 619-246-6131. We are also offering 30 and 60-minute time slots for your ministry or podcast. For more information on how you can become a part of KTAV Station of Inspiration lineup, please call 619-246-6131 or visit us online at ktav.tv/ministry.